Hey Pedro, you want to check the back door? I can't remember if I locked them or not. Man, uh, you take that a lot of different ways. I'm gonna have to continue reading that and see what that is. I'm pretty sure it's just about the house, man. But over here at the questionnaire, I don't think there's a back door. I'm gonna guess there's the back door of the Patreon that leads you to the pre-show questionnaires that guests fill out before they actually come on the show. That are just randomly and intermittently brought up so randomly. Sometimes it throws off the guest. What are you gonna do? But ladies and gentlemen, I am the unknown factor, aka that Wade Wilson of hip hop. This is the questionnaire, and today this gentleman's done quite a good deal of shit, man. Like it's a lot. Oh, I'm kind of wanting to pick his brain on several things. Annoyed that I haven't had a chance to read one particular comic, but that's neither here nor there. But like Jesus, Steve Fox, you keep working.
I'm a busy man.
Like seriously, man. Whatever. About that brief glitch, I don't even remember where the hell I was because
Pretty much
sometimes
just the intro.
it happens, man. It's whatever. Steve, whatever. All right, but like I said, you are a man you've done a lot, Steve. I, I'm I really don't know where to begin. So the main thing actually that I want to know with the variety of things that you've done, up to and including what you've edited. One, do you have a favorite? Two, how do you make sure that you're writing at the age appropriate level for what you're writing?
Well, it's hard to choose a favorite because obviously in comics you're working with a lot of collaborators. I want to respect all of them. If I choose one, it could be seen as, an implicit diss to another. However, if you twist my arm, Spider Ham is always the one that comes to mind because it was kind of the first break I had into this whole other part of comics. I've gotten to do 3 of those books now with Shadia Amin, who's become a good friend through doing those books. And they're just so fun. They're like a distillation of my love of superheroes and younger gag comics. And they're just like a blast to write. So even though it's a little tacky to pick a favorite, it's always the first title that comes to mind when I get asked about that. As for age appropriateness, honestly, and I think you will hear a lot of writers for younger readers say this, aside from complexity of the sentence, you really don't have to change that much. Um, and of course, real like verboten topics. Obviously, in a kid's book, I'm not going to talk about sex, drugs, and extreme violence. But beyond that, I don't find that writing for kids and writing for adults is all that different. Kids want to feel respected. They want to feel like you think they're intelligent and that they can meet you on your level. So I don't really write down when I'm writing for younger age ranges, other than the sentences aren't going to be quite as complex, or the word choice isn't going to be as obscure. But I also don't think I'm like a highly literate writer to begin with. I wish I was, and maybe I have my moments, but as a kid I cut my teeth on like Vertigo. Vertigo was really big for me, and I certainly don't think I'm like as smart or literate as Peter Milligan or Grant Morrison or any of the other folks who I was reading when I was a preteen.
I mean, firstly, you set pretty high ground as far as in the realm of literature that is comic books. You know what I mean? If that's where you're gonna point to, the only other name I would honestly quickly include in that is probably Alan Moore.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, there's a difference in those books. There is. What do you do in the regard to when you're balancing everything you're doing? Because I mean, you've got Son of a bitch. This is why I'm so annoyed I didn't get this printed. I'm still fucking annoyed I didn't get this printed. Yeah. You got all 8 eyes as well as you're working the 2 X-Men books right now. Or no, Spider-Woman and Dark X-Men. My apologies. I was thinking of the X-Men Unlimited series that you just did and twisted that together in my head. Like I said, he does a lot. Click that top link that's his website. You can see it all real quick. But how do you go balancing that to make sure that you are bringing the appropriate story, especially when you're working with Marvel? Because I know when you're working with Marvel, you're playing in someone else's sandbox, so you can't play the same as if it's yours. So what do you do to make sure you're balancing that? And what do you find to be more fun to go and play in that sandbox that you've obviously been a fan of for quite some time, or to work on something that is entirely yours?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I was a master of balance. There are days where I feel like I am not spinning the plates successfully. Because in addition to things like Spider-Woman and Dark X-Men, I have an 8-book first second contract. Those are books that are being done on 3 or 4 or 5 year spans that people won't see for a while. I have creator-owned books that haven't been announced yet. I do kids books. I do all these other things, and I edit a number of James Tynan's books at Image. So it is a lot of things to keep track of. What I found personally, I'm a binger. Like today, I spent the entire day writing an unannounced X-Men thing. Like that was my whole day. I wasn't doing, I answered a few emails, but it's not like in a day often I'm bouncing between, let me edit Department of Truth and then let me go write a children's book and then let me brainstorm X-Men. Those days only happen when it's an absolute deadline necessity. um, Otherwise, I do really have to like reset between each project, and I try to plan my days so that I can kind of like disconnect from one headspace, get into another. It sounds a little corny, but a thing that's helped me a lot this year, especially as I've been balancing so many titles. And in the spring, it'll become apparent like just how much I'm doing now, but a lot of it's not announced yet. Has actually been picking key music for each thing I do. So I'm not a creator who does like a full playlist. I have friends like Leah Williams who will make entire playlists for their books. I don't really do that, but I pick like a key song or a key album per character. So for Dark X-Men, it was Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Like he is the soundtrack to that book, especially the album Tinder Prey. So if I needed to really get into that headspace, I know I need to go for a drive or go for a walk and just listen to that. Spider-Woman's PJ Harvey, an upcoming X-Men thing that isn't announced yet, is actually Bruce Springsteen, which is maybe one of the more out there choices I've made, but it does help me kind of mentally lock into what I have to do.
I mean, that's because I know the most interesting combo I think I've ever heard was Doug Wagner was listening to disco while he wrote Plush.
I kind of see that actually. I mean, disco is like it's sick. It's sick music if you think about it too much, and that's kind of the appeal.
That's probably the most interesting combo I've ever heard. I know a lot of people end up listening to thematics when they're writing, which I think is a very understandable. You know what I'm saying? Like certain soundtracks and such.
Oh
Um,
yeah. I actually can't do that. I can't listen to anything while I write. I have to listen to it like beforehand, and then if I could write in a complete sensory deprivation chamber, that would be my ideal environment. Like any ambient noise throws me off. Oh, but I don't want to forget the other part of your question, which is, do I prefer originals or working in an established sandbox? And of course, not to have a cop out answer, they're fun for different reasons. Um, the, the comparison I always think of, I'm no huge fan of the comic book Wanted. I'm never going to take pot shots at peers, but I feel like Mark Miller, the dude's established, and I can say, Wanted's maybe not my speed, but early on, the main character's dad has some line about how he sleeps with men every once in a while, so that when he sleeps with women, it like feels more exciting again. That's kind of what it's like going back and forth between creator owned and existing IP, where you have your fun with one and you get to a certain spot and you're like, oh, okay, I feel like I've kind of hit my limit here, or it's starting to run dry. I got to go do the other thing and come back for a while. So that's been my experience. I am a lifelong Marvel fan. I have a Cyclops tattoo. Since childhood, that was kind of my thing. So I'm certainly not getting tired of that at all. But there are, of course, times where you want to do whatever you want, or be able to say, okay, I'm going to structure it this way, or I'm going to work on this thing for 12 months before it gets released, or what have you. So it's nice that I can still do both.
I feel like that was a very long-winded cop-out answer.
but an honest one.
Yeah, like really. There's not. What aspects do you prefer then, in regards to the difference? Because I mean, there's
Well,
obviously a great deal. Are there any that you look at when you're writing to create your own book and you're like, man, if I had that hindrance right now, I'd shoot myself, and vice versa? Like when you're writing to create your own book, like God, it'd be nice to just, if somebody else had written 30 years of backstory for this character I'm writing.
well, yeah, that's honestly part of it. It's a double-edged sword, but the thing about taking on established characters is that when I pluck Gambit into the first issue of Dark X-Men, 95% of readers have a preconception of who Gambit is. So I don't have to establish this is what a Gambit is. Maybe there's some readers who are encountering him for the first time, but for the most part, you come in with some knowledge. And Dark X-Men is kind of a weird example because half the cast is pretty obscure. But even then, if you're picking up this book right now in 2023, you probably have an idea at least of what's going on. So it's nice to have that in your corner. Of course, the flip side is then you can have people saying, well, that's not my Gambit. That's not how I think Gambit is, which thankfully hasn't been the case, but also only one issue is out so far. So give it time. In the original, in the original sphere, it is nice that you don't have any of that baggage. If I want to introduce a character and my conception of this character is that he seems really nice, and then in 2 issues he turns out to be a dirtbag, no one's going to say, oh, you ruined so and so. It's an original creation. I crafted that. And if a book goes on long enough, you can still engender some of that. I think in books like Saga, people end up forming opinions, but it's not always the case that generally in originals the reader is going to trust the creators, like, okay, this is their vision, this is what they're doing. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, yeah. If you've done that to create your own book, to where it's gotten the legacy that could be said, um, it's been running for like that's yeah. I mean, I think the only other place you'd see that quickly is if you're dealing with an IP. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
then you have a whole different story of things. Yeah, you dealt with. Wait, hold on. No, hold on. No, you okay? I had to run through. I mean, look, I was looking on your website and shit earlier. I don't have it in front of me. I'm slightly annoyed about that, like I said. Um, but there's no like you haven't ever worked in a comic in a property like GI Joe or anything to that effect. Which I find very
uh
good.
no, not really. I've done a lot of kids
Yeah.
books that are in like major licenses, stuff like Pokemon, Super Mario, My Little Pony. And honestly, even those sometimes do attract like weirdo adult fans. Mostly positive interactions, but when I was first starting out, I did a string of Transformers books, and to be honest, I don't have any real connection to Transformers. It's not one of the properties I grew up caring a lot about. um, but I did my research, I cared about that. And it's not that anyone came at me for getting things wrong. It's just that there were some real weirdo fans, and for a while I kept getting this person who clearly had like a fetish angle on the robots, like emailing me and messaging me and trying to like get specific scenarios put in the books. And I was like, these are for like 6-year-olds, so you might want to calm that down, buddy.
What? Wait. So, can, what? Part of me wants to ask. Part of me
Well,
don't want to ask.
I will keep it very top level. They had some very specific um, emasculation and sissification ideas about certain male Autobots, and I wanted to see that played out in official stories, which you know was never going to happen in a million years. So hopefully they're enjoying some deep dark corner of deviant art. I wish them the best, but Transformers licensed kids books was not the place to ask for
I don't think you could get that in Transformer license to anything, Steve. I don't know what the
that.
fuck, like, much less the kid books. I don't think it's gonna go anywhere. I mean, I know Kirkman owns the fucking properties now, but I don't see
I was gonna
him.
say, Skybound can get really wild sometimes. You never know.
I'd like to think Kirkman's a smart enough man to know how not to ruin his money. You know, I mean, he's obviously done fairly well for himself.
Maybe it's an untapped market, but personally, I think maybe that market's going to stay untapped.
Yeah. If this happens from Skybound, I'll be slightly depressed. That's all. That's all I know, man. But hey, on another note, what is it? You're currently doing Dark X-Men, which is part of the Fall of X story. What can I say, man? Just I read the X-Men back in the day. I have not gotten to the point where I'm keeping up with it yet because, well, mainly because I don't have a grand to spend, and then I don't know how much time to get caught up to where I'd be even like slightly current with things. Um, you know, because like I'm Reign of X, and for yeah, you see, it's going to be a lot. But just seeing that Dark X-Men, I was like, I gotta pick this up, and the only reason that I wanted to was because of the team that you've assembled. All right, so was that team assembled for you? Were you given a concept and like, or was this something you pitched, or how did you get? Like, you got Madeline Pryor and Albert, man, and Albert. All right, you got Albert in there. I'm like, dude, what?
So it was about 2080. Jordan White, the senior editor for the X-Men books, he and I worked together on a couple projects. He knew I loved horror and hadn't gotten a chance to really do it at Marvel. So he came to me last winter with the pitch for Dark X-Men. At the time, it was just Madeline Pryor and Havoc, an X-Men team, and CB Cebulski thinks it'd be cool if you used Albert. So I can't credit coming up with Albert on my own. However, I am a big fan of Larry Hama's run on Wolverine and Mark Silvestri's run on Wolverine. So it was not given to me as a mandate that I had to use Albert, but I was really excited at the prospect. Everyone else came from me. I sat down and I really wanted the most monstrous team possible. Because if we were going to do Dark X-Men with a horror influence, because it's not the first time there's been a Dark X-Men book. Years ago, during Dark Reign, when Norman Osborn had the Avengers, there was a Dark X-Men book that was more like slightly evil X-Men, or slightly evil intentions X-Men. This Dark X-Men is really supposed to be influenced by the horror genre. So I wanted characters who would never be X-Men in other conditions, because the franchise has a rich history of villains becoming X-Men as part of like the mutant unity, or fighting for the same cause. So I wanted the a-holes who would never sign up otherwise, like Implay and Azazel. Zero's been a little more amoral than outright evil, but he's a very chaotic guy. And then we had a mix, of course, of a couple familiar faces. Gambit was suggested to me later because we do actually a draft among the X-Men writers, where we all get together and we make sure no one wants the same character, and we also make sure that major characters are accounted for. You don't want to accidentally go 6 months without Rogue or whoever because just no one thought to include her. So Gambit was suggested later on, and he ended up being a really key part of the book. So that was a lucky push. But everyone else came from me. And I knew that spinning out of Dark Web, the event last year, that Madeline Pryor was going to be creating the Limbo Embassy in New York City, which is like an outpost of Limbo, one of Marvel's hell dimensions. So I was just very excited at the prospect of an amoral, chaotic X-Men team based out of an outpost of hell.
mean, I'd like to say that's a pretty good pitch for the comic right there. An amoral X-Men team that's based out of a dimension portal in New York that leads to hell.
Yeah.
What's the? Yeah, I mean, yeah, me being like, even if I wasn't reading X-Men currently, I'd kind of be like, because that's the one thing with you bring up with X-Men. I mean, there's a lot there, you know. Um, what do you think? And what do you think in that as far as one in working it, and two as far as just being a fan or trying or bringing a new fan in? The difference between if you look at just any creator-owned property almost. Some of them surpass that rule as far as just going to where they have a long legacy. I could name quite a few, but if you think more along the lines of things like, I don't know, I Hate Fairyland or Dead Romans or Saga, or these are things you can quickly pick up and read from the beginning to the end. They're all there. It's not something like with the Marvel or DC universe, where I mean, there's a lot, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like 70 years
Yeah.
of continuity in some cases. I mean, the thing I always try to remind people when they are comics curious is that when I was a kid, there was no Wikipedia. There was no guarantee that books would be collected into trade paperback. There was no digital comics. So what you did is if you wanted to read Superman and the issue on the stand was Superman, 683, you grabbed Superman 683 and you kind of caught up as you went. And maybe that's an imperfect answer, but that is how the industry worked for decades. And I think maybe we became more afraid of that as other resources became available. It's like, oh, well, I could buy all these digital comics. I could buy all these collections. I could read every Wikipedia. But any run worth its paper that it's printed on is going to give you the information you need. That's kind of a fundamental thing that we as comic creators do. And we don't always do it perfectly, but in any issue you pick up, characters are going to be named. Powers are going to get some sort of explanation. What is going on is going to get somewhat explained. And that's something that I took very seriously for Dark X-Men because I did pick a weird cast. I'm not counting on every reader of the book knowing who Implate is because he's a Generation X villain from the 90s who hasn't appeared that much since then. But if you just read these 5 issues, you will know everything you need to know about Implate for this story. And I think that's something that my peers in the X-Men office are also really good about. So that's kind of the hard love answer is if you want to try it out, just try it out. And if you don't take to it, if you do feel, hopelessly lost or you're just not clicking for you, that's okay. I mean, there are lots of comics on the stands. Maybe you do want to just pick something up that has a clear number one and, runs 50 issues. That's okay too. But if you're curious about one of these long running franchises, especially these days when things relaunch so often, to read the new Captain Marvel #1 from Alyssa Wong and Jan Bazaldua, you don't need to read every Captain Marvel ever. Like they're going to give you the context you need for this run. So that's just something I try to remind folks. And Dark X-Men is full of weirdos, and all you need to know is things went very bad for the X-Men at the Hellfire Gala, and now an evil demonic clone of Jean Grey is going to try to solve it her way. And the first issue tells you all of that too. So
That's just that just sounds like a fun time. It really, really does. Right now, the one I haven't heard much about because it hasn't released yet at this time, if memory serves, is Spider Woman.
yes,
Right? What's
it
what
hasn't come out yet. It comes out
what
in
you
November. The
what you cooking up?
prologue came out.
What you cooking up there? What can you get into? What can you tell us? What are you doing?
Yeah, so Spider Woman, Jessica Drew, she's the original Spider Woman, although Julie Carpenter is great too, and she's in this book as well. She's now Madam Web. So Jessica Drew in Spider Man, the Dan Slott, Mark Bagley book, she was briefly severed from the web of life. So for a little while, she ceased to exist. And when she came back, something very important to her was missing. So that's where we pick up. And It's spinning out of Gang War, which is a big event coming up in Amazing Spider-Man. All you really need to know about that is that New York City's gangs, which are all superpowered gangs, not true to life gang warfare. Tombstone, the Owl, Mr. Negative, those kind of characters. They've taken the violence in New York City to a level that Spider-Man can no longer tolerate. So he's getting together street level heroes like Jessica Drew, like Luke Cage, to finally do something about it. So our story in Spider-Woman spins out of that, but it's a very Spider-Woman focused story. So it's going to reflect gang war, but you can really treat it as like this is just if this is the only book you're reading from gang war, you're not going to miss anything. Like all you need to know is Jessica Drew has a personal vendetta, and she is going up against Diamondback, who is one of these gang lords. I'm working with Carola Borelli on it, who's a very talented artist out of Italy. And she draws a very slick, very fun Jessica Drew. We've got some fun cameos, both of characters that you would expect to see, like Captain Marvel, as well as some fun, slightly more obscure cuts that I was really excited to include in this. And it's a more down-to-earth take on Jessica Drew. I love the character. I always have. I think she's one of those characters that was blessed with like a perfect costume out of the gate, which matters a lot in comics. And that original Marie Severin look was just perfect. Like you can't really top it. No offense to anyone who's done other Jessica Drew costumes. But she's had runs that are a little more comedic, especially when she shows up in Captain Marvel. She's often kind of like the funny best friend. But back in the day, she went through periods where she was a detective. She went through periods where she was depowered and working street level cases. So this is taking her a little bit more to those roots for kind of a hard hitting spy action, detective action kind of story.
Man, you've just got two very different books right there coming out from Marvel in a great span, and then you add Spider-Ham 3 into the mix, right?
Yes.
I mean, and it's funny because they're all from Marvel, you know, but there's such a different. Those books are all so unique comparatively. Like if I'd seen somebody with all three of them, I part of me would be slightly surprised, like to have all three, like to have a combination of two, like to have two of those three. But if you had all three, I'd be like, well, that's a. I mean, all right, that's cool, whatever. But I don't think that's a combo you would see. Not to say it's odd or anything, but it would surprise me.
Yeah, maybe my mom, like picking them up to support me, would buy all
Well,
three.
I mean, if somebody's doing it just out of love for you, Steve, that don't count. I mean, somebody that walked into the store and went, "You know what I need in
Yeah.
my life? Dark X-Men, Spider Woman, and Spider Ham." You know,
Yeah,
like
I mean, it's fun for the whole family. I've got you covered across the buying public here, and that's not even including some of the Marvel things that haven't been announced yet. I've got something that's like mind expanding sci-fi that I feel like broke my brain trying to figure out. I've got something that's very like 3 Days of the Condor, like conspiracy thriller. I've got something that's kind of like berserk, like high fantasy manga action. And right now, the X-Men Unlimited arc I did with Steph Williams and Noemi Vittori is coming out. We're halfway through, and that's like slice of life stories on Krakoa. So I just kind of bop around to every genre possible.
so. Everything you just said is something that is as a project you're getting ready to work for Marvel that you can't announce or even tell us who's in it at all.
Correct. Although Jerry Dugan, one of my X-Men peers, he did break the news that I'm working on something that involves Rachel Summers, so that's publicly known. So folks can keep an eye out for something with Rachel, and
Ooh.
folks can also keep an eye out for something with Betsy Braddock, but not the same project. That's all I can give for now.
Yeah, that would be an interesting combo.
Well, there are a couple now in the comics. They got together in Captain Britain,
Huh.
but they're going to be in two separate projects that I'm working on. But I am not breaking them up, so fans, please don't send me hate mail or anything.
People are going to hear that and just instantly assume because let's face it, it's the internet. Don't they love to assume the worst? Yeah.
People were when Dark X-Men got revealed, people were convinced I was splitting up Rogue and Gambit. But I love Rogan Gambit. I got nothing against them.
Why do you think it is that fans become so adamant about certain things staying certain ways, to where man, sometimes it causes people to fight? Which I mean, we got better things to be fighting about on this planet. We really do. We want to fight about shit. I promise. Like a fictional character having something like it has to be really really bad, in my opinion, for it to be like something that needs to be debated. I don't know what you would have to do to a fictional character for me to be like, oh, we need to talk about this shit now. All right.
Well, my too serious answer is, and I I won't go at length because it'll just sound depressing. I do think there's an element of a lot of people feel so out of control about the things that really are affecting us that they express their control in the ways that they actually can affect. Like, I can't yell at someone online to stop climate change, but I can yell at someone online and maybe they quit a comic book I don't think they're writing very well.
Well, yo, this is Hugh Rookwood. You can catch the questionnaire every Wednesday. It's an unknown factor, though, so hopefully the show will appear. But, I'm just doing my due diligence and giving my shout out. So, the questionnaire, Hugh Rookwood, the unknown factor. What can I say? It's been a pleasure. You guys rock, man. Thank you, man.